Hey everyone, Spicy Toast Gaming here. Thank you for tuning in to our guide for Mordekaiser. If you enjoy all of our daily Path of Champions content, definitely like and subscribe, and let's get into it. We're going to start off with a brief overview of the champion, just so that you know if this champion is worth investing your time and resources into. Up first, we have Deathless. This is a new keyword being added into the game, and it's the core mechanic that Mordekaiser and his deck are built around. The Deathless keyword somewhat functions similar to both Barrier as well as Spell Shield. When a unit with Deathless dies, it instead revives with 1 health and is stunned for the rest of that round. And then the keyword is lost, but it can be reapplied. Next up then, we have a Versatile. Mordekaiser has a very versatile deck, a lot of different ways you can build out his units, and he can work with many different playstyles as well as relic builds. So if you like a champion you can play in many different ways, Mordekaiser can be great for that. Next up, we have Aggressive. Mordekaiser's deck is filled with units that have a very aggressive stat line, so very high amount of power and low amount of health. And that pairs great with the Deathless because a unit's power isn't going to go down when they get revived, but their health will go down to 1. So if you like playing with very aggressive units, then Mordekaiser has a great deck for that. We also have Ramp. Mordekaiser is an expensive champion, and so you normally want to try to ramp up to get to the point where you can play him and use him to end the game. Now it is a bit of an interesting pairing. Most aggressive decks are only focused on winning in the early game, but Mordekaiser, you're focused on putting the pressure on, but also surviving long enough to get your big Titanic champion on the board. Last up then, we have Balanced. So Mordekaiser is actually probably one of the most balanced champions we have in the game. He is incredibly strong, but he actually has some weaknesses kind of built into his kit that help him not feel just blatantly overpowered like some champions have been in the past. Now I know in this type of game mode, some people are just going to want to play a blatantly overpowered champion, and so playing a champion that has some weaknesses might not be appealing to some people. But I actually think it's fun playing a champion you know is balanced, and then you feel more accomplished when you're able to overcome the challenge of fighting against an enemy that actually is somewhat countering you and still being able to work around those difficulties and still succeed. There's also a lot of modifiers that you just hard counter as Mordekaiser, so that's also fun knowing that your deck just perfectly deals with whatever the enemy is throwing at you. Alright, that's it for the overview though. Let's go hop in game to better explain some of the points we touched on here. Alright, in game now, we have Mordekaiser at level 30 with those 3 stars. Let's first jump in and talk about Mordekaiser himself. So 7 cost champion, so pretty pricey, especially for Path of Champions. He is a 5/8, so he actually has a more defensive stat line than aggressive, but that's fine, you don't really want him getting off the board. But with that 8 health, he does classify as Titanic, which is really nice that he hits that value without having to put on any relics. Also note, he is both a Noxus and Shadow Isles champion, so if you're looking for a strong champion to fulfill multiple roles or multiple regions, Mordekaiser can work for that, which is quite nice. This will also be handy for the monthly challenges, where sometimes they have some modifiers that reduce the cost of a card from a specific region, and Mordekaiser being able to benefit from both of those would also be decently strong. Now as far as his effects, he has Challenger, and then play kill up to 2 allies. When you slay another ally, revive it. This is an incredibly strong effect because even though you're killing 2 of your allies, you're then immediately reviving it. Also, since he's a Shadow Isles champion, there's a whole bunch of kill effects you can benefit from, and so being able to get the benefit of killing your own units, triggering whatever spell you might be using or effect, and then have that unit just immediately revive is incredibly powerful. So just having Mordekaiser on your board, even if he's not leveled, is dramatically increasing your power. This is a absolutely crazy effect. His level up is 15 or more allies have died. Allies with 5 or more power count twice. This is a pretty hard level up to actually trigger, especially when you're just leveling up your Mordekaiser. There are some relics that can really help with this, but in general, you're probably not going to get Mordekaiser leveled in most matches, especially when you are leveling him up. That being said though, you're still getting so much power from his non-leveled up form that not getting him leveled isn't that big of a deal. You do want to try to focus though on having your units with 5 or more power die, since that will help you level up even faster. Now, once he does level up, he goes to a 6/9, nice, and then attack for the rest of the game. When you slay a unit, so yours or the enemy's, drain 1 from the enemy nexus. And this stacks up every time you attack, so this goes up 1 in power. This is a great way to focus on finishing out the game and to heal up your nexus so you come out on top. A very strong effect, but one that you're normally not going to have stack up too often because you will be ending the game fairly quickly. Now, Mordekaiser's champion spell, 10 cost, Realm of Death. It's slow. An ally starts a free attack, challenging the strongest enemy, kill all other units. Now, that effect, since you probably have Mordekaiser on the board, he will then revive his whole side of the board. So essentially, you're killing all the enemy units and then killing and reviving all of yours. So this is a very powerful effect, but it does cost quite a bit of mana. Overall, just his champion itself, I think, is a very fun card and great to throw on your board. And I like that he immediately is giving you a massive amount of power, even before he levels up. So his level up feels more like a bonus and less like a necessity. All right, let's go take a look at his star powers. So up first, round start, create a 2-cost indestructible in hand, or if you have one, reduce its cost by 1. So this is the 3-star version. For the 1-star, it's just when you have the attack token, then this goes, not every single round. But that indestructible, normally it's a 3-cost burst, grant an ally deathless. But here it's already starting off at a 2-cost, so it's getting 1 cost reduction, and it gets 1 more cost reduction every round. That deathless, we talked about it earlier. The next time this unit dies, remove deathless, revive it, stunned with 1 health. Now the second star power, +1 starting mana. When you revive an ally, grant it 2 power and overwhelm. Now that revive doesn't have to come from the deathless mechanic. There's a lot of other ways to also revive your units, such as every time Mordekaiser revives a unit from him just being on the board. So the fact that whenever you're reviving a unit, you're giving them that 2 power and overwhelm, very nice. Although note that when you are reviving an ally, it's resetting their stats back down to their essentially base form. So if you put a lot of extra buffs on this unit and then you revive them, all those buffs are going to be gone, unless it was like some item generation where you able to give that card items, then that would carry over when they're revived. But just know that that revival is going to reset any buffs, so it's not like you can keep reviving them and they're going to keep getting 2 extra power from this star power. They're just going to get 2 power and overwhelm, which is a very strong effect because you're going to be reviving a lot of your units, and them getting up to that 2 power will often make them hit the 5 power threshold, which can then help count towards Mordekaiser's level up conditions. So I think these are very nice star powers. They play together very well. They're not overpowered or crazy, but they are a very strong effect. Let's go take a look at his starting deck now. Up first, we have Shackled Ghasts. Very good card. 1 cost, 3/1 because of that pickaxe. Also, you get that focusing crystal on this, so when you play a spell, grant me 1/1. So this is a great card. It has the effect of Last Breath. The next time you revive an ally, create a copy of me in hand. So this will potentially die, but then when you revive another unit, which is going to happen fairly often, you're going to get another copy of this in your hand. Also with that 3 power, once this gets revived, it'll be at that 5 power threshold. And overall, this is just a really solid card and a great addition to your deck. If you're able to get something like Wild Inspiration, you'll be able to have a lot of created copies of this card you can play for no mana, so that is really strong. Next up then we have the Blade Pierced Revenant. So 2 cost because of that ancient coin, and it goes to a 2/3. This is deathless. When an ally is revived, grant it Challenger. So that's a pretty strong effect. Being able to just throw this on your board and then have it be granting your units Challenger every time they get revived is a nice strong effect. And with this getting reduced down to a 2 cost, you can play this very early in a match, and again, a great addition to your deck. This will be a slightly bit of a spoiler, but I think Mordekaiser has probably the best deck out of all of the new champions added. Next up then we have Legion Grenadier, another 2 cost with 3/2 stat line. Last Breath, deal 1 to the enemy nexus, and this has Challenger. But Challenger is really good, especially because you have a Last Breath effect, so you can make sure you get blocked so that this Last Breath effect will trigger. Since you're able to revive your units and give them deathless, you can trigger Last Breath effects essentially multiple times. Since you're killing the unit, revive them, and then you can just end up killing them again and repeating that cycle. So this card is great for that, but also it has 3 power. So once this gets revived, it'll be at that 5 power threshold, which can really help trigger Mordekaiser's star powers or his level up condition. Next up then we have Mist's Call. So this goes down to a 1 cost or a 2 cost because of that mana potion. but this also gets Sapphire Crystal, so get an extra mana gem. This is a great way to help speed up your ramp. When you're playing Mordekaiser, once you have this unlocked, you normally want to reroll pretty aggressively in your opening hand to try to get one of these so you can immediately start ramping up faster. And since this is reviving a random ally that died this round, when they're revived, they get that extra 2 power and that overwhelm, a really great addition to your deck. Next up then, Vile Feast, so 2 cost and 2 damage because that charging sigil will actually drain 2, so this is healing your Nexus as well. So you drain 2 from a unit and summon a Spiderling. So getting another unit you can use as a blocker, and then having a 2 cost drain 2 from a unit is great. Cheap removal spell that you could use to take out frustrating targets such as Zoe as soon as they're played, and just overall a solid cheap removal spell. Next up then we have Death's Grasp, another great removal spell, so 3 cost fast. Kill an ally to deal 5 to a unit, and this also gets that summoning beacon, so they summon a follower with my cost from your regions. Another great way to summon a unit and then deal a large amount of damage to the enemy for a pretty reasonable price. And then killing an ally, that's not that much of a downside because you can just use this on one of your deathless units and then have them revive, then getting more power and overwhelm, as well as contributing to Mordekaiser's level up. So another great card. Then we have the Chronicler of Ruin, so 4 cost 5/3 with that pickaxe. So again, hitting that 5 power threshold, very nice. Play kill an ally, then revive it. Another great way to trigger Mordekaiser's level up, reviving another unit in order to give them the extra power and overwhelm from the star powers. And then if you use this on a deathless unit, you're essentially cloning the unit, since the unit is getting revived from the death list, but it's also getting revived by this card. So you can also use this just to fill out your board even more if you want. Now these 4 costs are pretty expensive, and so these are the ones you're most likely to cut, even though they are still solid cards. Next up then we have Lord Malot, 4 cost 5/2 with that quick attack. Again, another card that is baseline 5 power, and this also has that death list. So a pretty simple card, but just a great card to throw down and help contribute to your board. And then we finish off with Mordekaiser. So a very good deck. There's some ways to improve your ramp, multiple ways to revive your targets, many different ways to get your units to that 5 power threshold to help trigger Mordekaiser's level up condition. And then you also have some solid removal, both from your 2 removal spells as well as having a challenger card and then another card that can grant more units challenger. So it's an interesting approach where you're technically a ramp deck, but you're still putting a lot of pressure on early. Quite often you might actually just end the game before you play Mordekaiser because you have such a aggressive deck. And against most opposing decks, they're going to struggle to permanently kill any of your units because you'll just give them death lists, they'll die and immediately revive. So overall, it is a very fun deck, but we will actually take this opportunity to talk about some of your weaknesses. For one, if you're going up against an enemy that has a massive amount of removal, where they can just kill your units and you can't protect them enough with your death list, that can end up being an issue. So some opponents like Ezreal can really be frustrating for you, especially because a lot of your units, when they get revived, they're at 1 health. So if the enemy has a lot of cheap removal spells like Ezreal does, that can be a bit of an issue for you. Also, since when your units are getting revived, they have that 1 health, that means if the enemy's attacking with overwhelm units, you can really struggle to actually make a meaningful block because your units are going to be barely reducing down the damage of their attack. So those are the main weaknesses of your deck that you need to watch out for. Enemies with large amount of cheap removal, like Ezreal, or units that have a lot of big overwhelm units, which can be Aurelion Sol or also Tryndamere. So while you are very strong, you do have some of those drawbacks. Let's go now take a look at those champion level ups. So at level 2, your Chronicler of Ruin gets the pickaxe. Now this is a fine upgrade, gets you that 5 power. Little sad that the first upgrade isn't for one of your cheaper units. You really like it when they actually make one of your 1 or 2 drops get an item right away, because I think that's more useful. Next up then, Legion Grenadier gets that Skirmishing Saber. Really good upgrade, especially for a unit that has that last breath effect. Next up then, Blade Pierced Revenant gets that Ancient Coin. Again, letting you play your cards even earlier. Really nice there. Lord Malot at 9 gets those speed wraps, getting that quick attack. Quick attack is very strong on units that have a high amount of power and low amount of health, because that means they're not getting hit in return. So him getting that speed wraps is actually quite nice. At 12, Shackled Gas gets that pickaxe. Pretty good upgrade since that power isn't going to be reset when they revived. And then when they do revive, they're going to be hitting that 5 power threshold, so they can start contributing to Mordekaiser's level up even faster. At 15, Vile Feast gets that charging sigil, so it gets 1 extra damage on its drain effect. This is good. It takes it from a kind of useless removal spell to actually a decent removal spell, because a lot of the targets you want to be taking out have more than just 1 health. So even though it is just 1 extra damage, it does actually make a pretty big impact. Next up then, Mist Call at 18 gets that mana potion. Good upgrade, but we're really looking forward to when this gets that extra mana gem. 21, Death's Grasp gets that summoning beacon, so you're going to summon a 3-cost unit when you cast this. It is really nice and kind of turns this into a better version of your other removal spell, since it's also killing a unit and summoning a unit as well. Next up then, at 24, Mist Call, get that Sapphire Crystal. So this is a pretty late upgrade, but this is a very strong effect. It will really help speed up your game plan. You want to be casting this and getting as many copies of this in your deck as you can, especially once you get that Sapphire Crystal. And then last up, Shackled Ghasts get that Focusing Crystal, so they can scale up the more you play spells, and you do actually have a decent amount of spells you're wanting to play, because you're wanting to play your Mist's Call very early as soon as you can. You're also having 2 removal spells, and then from your star powers, you have your Indestructible that you're making potentially every single round, and so you are actually playing a decent amount of spells. Overall, Mordekaiser, really well constructed deck. I think Riot did a great job here, especially a lot of these upgrades are very impactful, and I do think Mordekaiser has the best starting deck out of all 3 of the new champions, and I even think all 3 of the new champions actually have pretty good starting decks. Next, let's go take a look at Relics. So Mordekaiser, there are a lot of relics you can use on him, and while there are some epic relics that really help you out, I have been playing around with some rare only relic builds, and they are still quite strong. So even if you can't get the epic relics, don't feel too bad. Mordekaiser still works well with just the rares. Now up first, Starforged Gauntlets. We're just going for the first effect. If I'm Titanic, +1 starting mana. Mordekaiser is Titanic because he has that 8 health, so you just get 3 mana at the start of the game. Really nice to help speed up your game plan. Then you have the Disciple of Shadows. I cost 1 less for each ally in play. Play, deal 3 damage to all other allies. So this is giving you some nice cost reduction. And then when you play Mordekaiser, he's likely going to kill his whole board because most of your units have 3 health or less. But then because of his effect, he's going to revive your whole board. This really helps contribute to your level up condition, and is also giving all of your units a nice amount of power and overwhelm since they're all dying and getting revived. Now, while this does sound overpowered, there is a decent alternative of a rare relic, which we'll get into later. Last up though, Corrupted Star Fragment. Support, kill my supported ally, grant me its keywords and stats. This is really good with Mordekaiser, again because of his effect. When you're killing that unit from the Corrupted Star Fragment, you're then immediately reviving them. So you're getting all the benefits with all those stats and keywords, but then you're just immediately reviving the unit, so you're not actually getting any of the downsides. So this is my go-to relic build. Obviously, not everyone's going to be able to do this because it has 2 epics in there. So let's go talk about some of the other relics. Up first, let's talk about another epic that I haven't been able to test, but I think would work quite well. We have Portal Pals. When I'm summoned, create 2 random 7+ cost units from your regions. Reduce its cost by my base cost. So since your base cost is 7, these 2 cards are going to have some massive cost reduction and potentially will be free to play, and they'll also be very strong cards. So I haven't been able to play and test this one out yet, but I do think if you have this, it could be a fun thing to try on your Mordekaiser. Looking at some rare relics now, Archangel Staff, round start refill your spell mana. While this is a nice effect, I wouldn't actually recommend it since Mordekaiser is going to get on the board so late. Same with the Chemtech Duplicator. When you play a spell, if you have 6 or more mana gems, copy it with the same targets. Now, while this will probably activate as soon as you play your Mordekaiser, most of your spells you don't actually need to trigger multiple times. Especially the spell you're playing most is granting your unit Deathless. Having that go off twice isn't going to actually help you at all. So this is one you could play around with, but again, I don't really think it's that necessary. Green Glade Shadeleaf support, grant my supported ally elusive. If you want, you could play around with this, especially with your Corrupted Star Fragment, where you put this first, so it supports the unit, grants it elusive, and then the Corrupted Star Fragment consumes that unit, granting your Mordekaiser elusive. Now, I don't think that combo is really worth the 2 relic slots, but I know some people really like pairing these together. Just make sure you put the Shade Leaf first, and then you'll be able to activate that combo. Guardian Angel, start adventures with 1 more revive, and then Last Breath, if it's the first time I've been slaying this game, revive me with 1 health. Now, your Mordekaiser hopefully won't be dying, but you could play around with this if you wanted some fun shenanigans, to be able to revive your own unit, and to make sure they don't stay dead, which is great for your Mordekaiser. Blade Rack allies have Challenger. This one wouldn't be bad. You do already have some Challenger in your deck, so it's not like you're really needing a lot more. But making sure all of your units are getting the best blocks or trades possible can be quite nice, so this isn't bad. Succubus Brand, 1/1, and when I kill a unit, summon a random husk. Now this one, while I think a lot of people would immediately want to pair this with Mordekaiser, I think this has a pretty big issue where your board, when you actually play Mordekaiser, is already normally full, and so trying to fill it up even more with these husks, I don't really think is that good of an idea. Deceiver's Crest. Now this one is actually pretty fun. When I level up, create a copy of my champion spell in hand, it costs 0. Remember, Mordekaiser's champion spell is this 10 cost, kill all units, essentially yours and the enemies, but since you have Mordekaiser, your side will then revive. This is something that is fun to try out, and I used it for a handful of games. It was fine, but to be honest, this only triggers when he levels up, and normally you can end games before that happens, and then even when he does level up, you don't really need that spell to actually finish off the game. So while I did play with it for a while and it was fun, I don't really think it was that needed. Troll King's Crown, allies have Overwhelm. This is one that, while it can be helpful, you normally don't need as much, since a lot of your units are going to have Overwhelm already from your star powers, so not one that is quite as needed. Wicked Harvest. Now this one is actually very good for Mordekaiser. This is one that I would throw on if you don't have Disciple of Shadows. Play, deal 3 to all other units. Now this will normally kill your entire board, but because of your effect here, when you slay another ally, revive it, this means you're going to be killing your whole board and then reviving all of it. This really helps contribute to your level up condition. And so if you don't have Disciple of Shadows, I would highly recommend playing with this. It works out great. I wouldn't pair them together. I don't think that's actually that good. I tried that, wouldn't recommend it. But if you don't have Disciple of Shadows, this is great alternative. And dealing 3 damage to the entire enemy board normally will result in a couple kills as well. So great relic to play with. And then another very good relic is actually Wriggle's Lantern. Round end, grant me impact twice. If I'm in hand, max impact 10. So just throwing one of these on your champion, normally they'll be at those 10 stacks by the time you play Mordekaiser if he was in your opening hand. And so this is just giving you Mordekaiser an extra 10 damage on the enemy Nexus when he attacks. And this is 10 damage that even if he's blocked, it's still going to go through and hit the Nexus. This is actually a very strong relic. I played with it for a couple adventures and really liked it. So even if you don't have the epic relics, I do think there are some solid relics that you can use, and I think he is still a solid champion even without the relics. That being said though, the relics do give you a good amount of power, so if you have them available, definitely test them out on your Mordekaiser. As far as common relics go, Lost Chapter, when I'm summoned, refill your spell mana. Always good, especially with Mordekaiser. You do have a lot of spells you're wanting to play, especially your Deathless, so this can be quite nice. Next up then, Stormrazor, Quick Attack Challenger, always a very powerful combo, so that can be decent if you want to be sure he can get the best trades possible. Starchild Staff, Game Start, heal your Nexus 5. If you're noticing you're taking a little bit too much Nexus damage, this is a great common power that actually gives you a really good amount of sustain. So if you're struggling leveling up your Mordekaiser, this could actually help you out. And then last up, Z-Drive Prototype, start adventures with 2 extra rerolls. Probably what you want to use in many of your common relic slots, as making sure you get the right powers or the right support champions, or being able to re-roll the shop. All of that can really help contribute to having a good run, and so getting just a couple extra re-rolls can be quite helpful. Alright, that was it for the relic selection. Now I didn't go through every single relic in the game, just touched on some that work out quite well, or ones that you might think work but aren't actually as needed as you might think. That being said though, definitely play around with the relics and find what you like most with your Mordekaiser. Let's go take a look now at what powers you might want to get in game, as well as cards or support champions to look out for, and then finish off with our ranking of the champion overall. Alright, taking a look at powers now. Up first here on the left we have Trifarian Might. When you summon a 5+ power ally, it strikes the weakest enemy. Now this is really nice for Mordekaiser, because not only are most of your cards, or a good amount of your cards, able to naturally hit that 5+ power to trigger this, but when one of your units is revived, that counts as a summon. So when they're revived, they can then trigger this again. Now this doesn't work for all of your units because sometimes they'll revive, be at 3 power, the game will check to try to do the Trifarian Might, it won't go off, but then your star power will then kick in and grant it that 2 power. So this doesn't always work if you're counting on your star power to grant you the 2 extra power to hit the 5 power threshold, but even without that, you are reviving quite a few units that are able to naturally have that 5+ power. And so being able to abuse that summon mechanic to just get some free removal is quite nice. Next up then, we have the best defense. Allies have attack, grow my health to match my power. Now most of your units have a very high power threshold, but a very low health threshold. So being able to boost that health up to their power really helps your units have much more survivability and really fills in the main weakness of your units. Last up for this slide, we have Phantom Pranks, one of the new powers added this expansion. When an ally dies, deal 1 to the enemy nexus. Now you're normally going to have a lot of your units die and then be revived, and so you will get a good amount of damage out of this power. Next up then, we have Titanic Wake. When you summon a unit with 8 attack, health, or cost, grant it 8/8. And that's a additional 8/8 over whatever their stats already were. Now this is great for your Mordekaiser. He's Titanic, so he will always trigger this, but then quite often you can get other units that can get up to that 8 power threshold, even though you don't have that many in your starting deck. So you normally will be able to trigger this with more than just your Mordekaiser, but it's definitely great just for your Mordekaiser, even if nothing else. Next up then, we have Reunited. Allies have 1 power. This is just good to get your units closer to hitting that 5 power threshold, to trigger your Trifarian if you're using that, or to maybe try to trigger your Titanic Wake, or to just be at the 5 power threshold so that when they die, they contribute 2 to Mordekaiser's level up condition. So a really simple power, but a nice one to have. Next up then, Duelist. When you summon an ally, give it Challenger this round. Always a strong effect, but when you revive a unit, again, that counts as summoning. So essentially when they get revived, they're able to get that Challenger. Now that won't be too important for your units that are being revived from Deathless because they'll be stunned, but you still have other ways to revive your units, and so you're able to get a little bit more benefit from this than most other decks. Next up, the slide we pretty much always use because it's relevant for almost every champion. Wild Inspiration, your created cards cost 1 less, so this works in a multitude of ways for you. For one, your star powers, creating that indestructible in hand potentially every round, that can be reduced down by 1. Really nice. But also your Shackled Ghasts. That is your 1-cost spell that have the last breath effect of when an ally is revived, you create a copy of that unit in hand. That created copy is then going to cost 0, so you can essentially just be playing these cards for free, which is very powerful, really help fill out your board. Then we have Sorcery, round start, refill your spell mana. Again, you do have a lot of spells you're playing, you're generating a new one every round potentially, so making sure you always have the mana to play those spells is very nice, as well as the freedom to always spend all of your mana every round and not feeling like you need to bank any for next round. Really solid star power. And then we have Spell Slinger, just making all your spells cost 1 less. Very similar to Sorcery. You just want to make sure you can always play your spells when that need arises. Next up then, let's talk about some powers you don't need. Now, this isn't saying these powers are inherently bad and you need to avoid them. This is just going to be a selection of powers that might seem really good, but they might actually not be as good as you might initially think. Up first, Inheritance. When an ally dies, grant its power to a unit in hand. Now, that sounds amazing. Unfortunately, all of those buffs are lost when a unit revives. And this is just increasing your unit's power, not actually their health. So normally what happens is you might play this unit that has a very high power threshold, but then when you attack, they're just going to get blocked out, and even if you revive them and they then get that overwhelm, all that extra power is then essentially lost or is getting returned to another unit in hand. So if you also had like the power that gives you that overwhelm for all your units, then this could pair really nicely together, and it still is a solid power, but it's just not one that's as amazing as you might initially think, because normally for Mordekaiser, your units are doing damage once they revive and get that overwhelm, otherwise they just get blocked out, and that's still normally going to happen with whatever units you play that get buffed by this power. So it's still decent, but not nearly as strong as you might initially think. Next up then, Raiding Party. When you damage the enemy nexus, grant the top ally in your deck 1/1. This is similar to the problem with Inheritance because all those buffs are going to be lost when your unit revives. Now, Raiding Party is also increasing their health, so they won't die quite as easily, but it is just a similar issue of giving your units a whole bunch of buffs isn't that great, since all those buffs will be lost if they end up dying, which will happen fairly often to your units. Now, normally they don't stay dead, they just get immediately revived, but it is something to watch out for. Again, I'm not saying don't get these powers, just wanting to give you some extra information so that you can make the most informed decision when you see one of these pop up as an option. Next up then, support champions. As always, this is not an exhaustive list of all the champions you might want to choose. It's just some champions that work out well and the reasons why they work out well for you. So up first, we have ramp. Any other decks that can also help you ramp up to get your bigger units, especially your champions, out earlier, that's going to be great for you. Then also just Shadow Isles champions. All the Shadow Isles have a lot of effects that are based about killing your own units or benefiting from that, and the Mordekaiser deck is uniquely built to exploit those effects and get the most benefit out of them. So pretty much grabbing any of the Shadow Isles decks will work out quite well for you. Up first then we have Volibear, great champion that is able to play a lot of Sigils of the Storm to try to cheat out your bigger units such as Mordekaiser. And then Volibear is also a fairly aggressive champion, able to kill a lot of units, which can be quite nice for your playstyle. Next up then we have Thresh. Thresh is a great addition to your roster, and he levels up by seeing units die, including your own units, so you can normally level him up pretty quickly, and then you might be able to use him to again cheat out your Mordekaiser. Moving on then, we have some cards to look out for. So up first here on the left, we have the Avarosian Sentry, Last Breath, draw 1. Now this came with Fearsome, which is nice, but you're mainly looking at that Last Breath effect. Since you can essentially abuse Last Breath effects and get them to trigger more than they're supposed to by then reviving the units, you can kill them again. This is a pretty solid card that you might want to grab, especially if you need some draw. Next up then we have the Ravenous Butcher. So 0 cost 3/2, so a pretty good stat line. Also had some additional stats because of that Giant's Belt. And then to play me, kill an ally. So normally you have to sacrifice another unit in order to achieve this, but you can use this to trigger a revive on one of your deathless units. So you're getting that revive, you're getting that extra stats and overwhelm, but then you're also getting a solid unit that you kind of played for free. Next up then, Rite of Calling. So 1 cost slow. This also had draw a champion on it. Kill an ally or destroy one of your mana gems to draw a champion. Now 1 cost, kill your own unit to guarantee champion draw. Again, you don't really care about killing your own units, so you're really getting the benefits of this spell with, again, not having to suffer the downsides. Next up then, Amalgamation of Vile Rites. Deathless to play me, kill an ally. Last Breath, heal your Nexus. This also had the Vampiric Scepter, which again heals your Nexus based on its cost, and it had the Shadow Totem, so when it was summoned, it also summoned a ephemeral copy. This was an absolutely crazy card. For one, it had 5 power, so every time it died, it was able to trigger Mordekaiser's level up. It also had Deathless, so when it would die, including the ephemeral copy, it would then summon another copy of it, which would then summon another ephemeral copy from the Shadow Totem, because that is a summon effect, so the revives trigger that as well. So just playing this card essentially made a army of itself that just fully healed up the Nexus, leveled up Mordekaiser, and was just able to be a great addition to our deck. So this card is good. Having a card with Deathless and a Last Breath effect, really good. Having any cards with Shadow Totem, also very good, because you can keep triggering that effect because it is a summon effect. Last up then, the Undying, Last Breath, revive me at next round start and grant me 1/1 for each time I've died. Again, a interesting Last Breath effect that you can then trigger multiple times, especially if you put Deathless on this, so you kill it, it'll then revive at next round start, but then because it's Deathless, it's summoning another copy of itself, and then you're giving it that overwhelm. So there's a lot of different cards you can play with Mordekaiser. Again, anything that has a powerful summon effect you can abuse because you can just keep reviving them and summoning them. Anything with a strong Last Breath effect, you're again able to do the exact same thing. Or any cards that benefit from killing other units, you again can get the benefit of without that downside. Lastly, let's finish up with the ranking. So I think before level 20, he's a solid C tier champion, and then after level 20, he's around the B tier. However, that being said, he is a rather interesting champion because against certain enemies and modifiers, he's able to absolutely destroy and feels like an S tier champion, but then against some other more difficult modifiers that specifically counter him with a lot of removal or overwhelm, then he can fall back down and feel more like a C tier champion again. For his region rankings, he's pretty mid tier for both. Up against Noxus, all the Noxus decks are very strong. So he's probably actually closer to the bottom for Noxus, but that's just based on how crazy Noxus is. Now for Shadow Isles, there's some strong decks in there, but there's also a bit of weaker decks as well. So I really think for the Shadow Isles, he is more mid to top mid for those champions. So he can be good if you're wanting a solid champion for both Shadow Isles as well as Noxus, but overall he's kind of just a middle of the road champion. As far as pros, he's a very versatile champion, a lot of different ways you can play and build him. I really love playing champions that have a lot of different options, so I really enjoy playing him. But for both the pros and the cons, he is a balanced champion in my opinion. That means he has both strengths and weaknesses. A lot of people just like playing a champion that is all strength and has almost no weaknesses. So I know some people won't like the fact that he has some blatant weaknesses, but I actually think that makes him a bit more of an interesting champion, because it's not like those weaknesses are because of a bad design in the champion, or the champion is fighting itself or has some anti-synergy that's built into some other champions that don't really feel like a weakness, more just bad design. Here though, I think it's just a good design and a champion that has some very good roles to play, but some other situations where you might not want to bring them, and I think that's perfectly fine. We don't need all of our champions to just be broken and overpowered, and I think that makes him more interesting to play. But that is both a pro and a con based on your own viewpoint. And then as far as cons, he can be somewhat relic reliant. Now yes, being able to use certain epic relics does make him more powerful. That being said, I don't think you have to use epic relics in order to get the most out of him, but they do definitely help, and currently the best epic relics for him are the two that you can actually buy with real money, and I know that's definitely going to be an issue for many people. Overall though, I think he is a very fun champion and a great addition to the roster. I think he plays very differently than every other champion, and I really look forward to playing him in the next set of monthly challenges. That's it for the guide though. If it helped you out, and if you like my content, definitely like and subscribe. I appreciate all the support, and I hope you have a great day.